So again, we have in our studio here today Bob McNab, who is here to talk the economy, our nation's finances, with Old Dominion University. And we talked about the defense spending bill and what that would mean if it passed and here in Hampton Roads. But you heard the Democratic senator talking about the Affordable Care Act tax subsidies.
Correct.
And that is set to expire by the end of this month. Both Republicans and Democrats, they put together their own plans, and that is set to go before the Senate tomorrow. What would it mean if those subsidies expire when we're talking about affordability, not just health care, but here within our local economy?
Well, let's look big picture first. What does this actually mean? These subsidies, or the COVID-era subsidies, are tax credits that are essentially providing a cost break on insurance policies through the ACA or Obamacare marketplace. So if you need coverage in the marketplace, you go there and you see a price, and that price is partially or fully subsidized by the federal government. So if your income is sufficiently low, you actually pay nothing for insurance through the marketplace. What happens is that insurance costs have risen faster than the pace of inflation over the last decade, and especially over the last 5 years. And so the cost of those tax credits has increased since they first came about. Now, those tax credits expire on December 31st. If the tax credits are not extended, that means those subsidies go away, and individuals will face significant increases in their monthly premiums through the marketplace. So if you are in your 50s or 60s, you could be looking at increases of $300 to $600 a month or $1,000 a month. Not only that, your deductibles will increase as well. So you can imagine a situation where you're paying $200 to $300 a month for health insurance, and all of a sudden that goes to $800 or $1,000 a month, and your deductible goes from $2,000 to $10,000. Or you're paying nothing with no deductible, and you still pay nothing, but your deductible is now $7,000 because your income is below, for example, $40,000. So how are people going to react? Well, they're going to do what they did before the marketplace. They're going to go without insurance. How does that impact you? Well, a lot of people will say, I have insurance through my employer, I'm on Medicare, that's not going to impact me at all. If people forego preventative health care, when do they seek out health care? When their health conditions deteriorate and they end up in the emergency department. So you sitting at home today may go, I'm covered, this isn't going to affect me, but they'll be showing up more ill in the emergency department. That's the most expensive form of preventative care and treatment, rather than taking care of those problems that are preventable or manageable, like diabetes or heart disease, because of the lack of health care insurance. So across Virginia, here in Hampton Roads, and across the United States, we'll see uninsured rates increase and increase significantly elsewhere in Virginia. Hampton Roads is kind of unique. We have a large population of military retirees who are covered by TRICARE for life. So our uninsured rates in Hampton Roads tend to be lower than the Virginia average or the national average. But for those people on the marketplace, it will be a big shock.
And it's interesting in this particular situation because those tax credits, they were the pin in between both Republicans and Democrats for the record-breaking shutdown, and we saw really no resolution out of it other than that they would bring it back to a vote, a promise for that, and try to figure out. Now we're finally getting a plan from both sides. Democrats, obviously, they want to extend it as kind of it is right now. Republicans, they want to end the credits, but they want to add money in for the health savings accounts for certain individuals.
Right.
Democrats say they're not going to go for that. Republicans probably are saying they're not going to go for the Democratic plan either. So not sure if they're still going to be able to reach a resolution by the end of this month, but that's what we're looking at right now. But you have, people like Jen Kiggins, who's a Republican, who says we got to figure this out because of the reasons that you just stated. But the government shutdown, it was resolved. still set a record for the amount of days, 43 days. But again, we could find ourselves in a similar situation come January if, another CR is not passed. Let's focus on what has happened. What impact did that shutdown have long term, or at least that we're seeing already, on our nation's economy, on our local economy? Are you starting to see a picture of what that kind of did for us here in the area and across the country?
Well, the ironic thing about the shutdown is we can't talk about the impact of the shutdown because the shutdown delayed the release of economic data. So the indicators that would tell us how much it impacted the economy have now either been delayed, modified, or won't be released at all. And that is especially troubling when you think about the overall state of the economy in Virginia and nationally and in Hampton Roads. Prior to the shutdown, we knew that employment was slowing, if not declining, in Hampton Roads in Virginia. We knew the unemployment rate was rising. We knew that inflation had risen to 3.0% in September. Now, we are finding out that we have this extended gap where we're having to rely upon private sources and other sources of data to try and figure out what happened to the economy during the shutdown. We know a couple things. First, for the poorest people in the United States that rely upon SNAP funds, relying on government assistance, that's a financial stressor for them that reverberates throughout the economy, right? If you miss a payment or an unemployment check or something, that tends to impact you more if you have less resources. So we know that in the short term, poverty rates and financial stress will increase for many American households. The good news about the shutdown was that federal workers and military employees were paid in arrears. That is, when the 43-day shutdown was over, they received pay for the time that was missed. However, federal government contractors in many instances who weren't reporting for work weren't paid as well. The larger concern that we have, and what we'll start seeing as the data become available in 2026, is we knew there was tens of thousands of federal civilian workers who took the DOGE, Department of Governmental Efficiency, fork in the road, the early resignation, early retirement. That became effective on 1 October, the same day the federal government shut down. So we actually don't know how many people actually left federal government service. We know for Virginia that almost 9,000 fewer federal civilian employees were employed in August. We suspect that's going to be much greater once the data becomes available, and that's pushing Virginia's unemployment rate towards 4% by the end of the year.
In the case that we do see another situation where we find some form of government stalemate by the end of, this current extension, I know that people don't want it. My question is, can we afford it if another shutdown were even happen?
Well, again, it depends upon the duration of the shutdown. Shutdowns could be like snowstorms. They're inconveniences, and you wake up on Monday morning and the government was shut down over the weekend and it really doesn't bother anybody. Or it's like the last 43-day government shutdown where we had court fights on whether the federal government should pay, for example, SNAP benefits, even though there was a reserve fund set up for government shutdowns to pay SNAP benefits. So those policy discussions and those fights get exacerbated the longer the federal government shutdown occurs. We know from a simple fact is this: federal government shutdowns typically don't save money, they cost money. And you may be going, well, that doesn't make sense. The federal government's not operating. How does it cost money? Well, first of all, you're paying everybody in arrears. So whether they worked or not, they got paid. So you're still paying all the salaries. You also think about all the inconveniences around the shutdown. You may not be a federal civilian worker, but you went to the airport and your TSA line was 2 hours instead of 30 minutes. Your goods got delayed. Your forms didn't get filled out. You couldn't file for unemployment insurance or Medicare benefits, etc. All those frictions build up in the economy and cost the economy significant amounts of money. So in other words, think about it this way. You're just creating inefficiency. That inefficiency costs money, and that's why shutdowns typically cost more than they save.
Right now, I do see House Speaker Mike Johnson, who is speaking. If we can just for a few moments take it, because we have way more questions about things that are going on today. I just want to listen to what he's saying right now, and then we'll come in, Sarah, probably in just a few minutes.
Lower your premium 6 months ago, but they refused because they wanted to keep health care as a political football. They do not want a solution. They want an issue. That's what this is about. They use the American taxpayers, they admitted themselves during the longest shutdown in U.S. history a few weeks back, as leverage in this cynical political game. So in the coming days, what you're going to see is the other party, the Republican Party, continuing to do the important work that we've already begun to actually lower the cost of health care and reduce fraud, and we hope Democrats will join us in those efforts. There are two parties in this town. One has no intention and no plan and no desire to lower your health care costs. They really haven't put any good idea on the table. They just want to subsidize a broken system. Check them on that. The Republican Party, on the other hand, is already demonstrating that we know how to do this. We're not just talking about it, we've done it. In the Working Families Tax Cut, you will remember, in the Medicaid reforms, we went after program integrity. We didn't change the substance of Medicaid, as they've claimed falsely. We went to program integrity. Why? Because we owed that to the American taxpayers. We got ineligible recipients off of Medicaid, and we cut out the fraud, waste, and abuse. And the CBO said they've calculated it saved $185 billion for American taxpayers, and it reduced premiums. We reformed it to strengthen Medicaid. Those same principles are going to guide us in the months, in the weeks, the days and weeks and months forward. As Leader Scalise noted, we have some low-hanging fruit. We have some things that every Republican agrees to. Democrats won't. Remember, they don't actually want to fix this problem. But you're going to see a package come together that will be on the floor next week that will actually reduce premiums for 100% of Americans who are on health insurance, not just the 7%. Remember, the COVID-era subsidy only covers 7% of Americans, and it was passed and extended without any reforms at all. It would only reduce their premiums by 4%. So they're using that as a red herring. The overall system is broken, and we're the ones that are going to fix it. You will see that laid out. Thanks to the good work of Chairman Cole and all of our appropriators, we have our appropriations process that will be going forward as well. We're moving those through the regular order process, and that's the way it's supposed to work. So you'll see many of those going through the process, and we think we can get it all wrapped up by the end of that deadline on January 30th. And you'll see that process continue over the days and weeks ahead as well. I would say this again. This Congress has been the most productive and successful in the modern era, and I think you can make an argument, one of the top 5 of all time. You'll have heard me say that. Look at the evidence and the facts. Don't listen to the talking points. This team has delivered with small margins what the American people asked us to do and what we promised we would do. And that work has just begun. It will continue in earnest all the way through the end of this year as we sprint through the end of this calendar year and we start the new session in January. We never take our foot off the gas. So with that, I'll take a few questions. Yeah.
Speaker Johnson, do you intend to advance pro-life provisions in your health care package?
Okay, you're sitting there listening to House Speaker Republican Mike Johnson there, also talking about the tax credits for the Affordable Care Act that we were just talking about, again, set to expire here by the end of the month. And now that is going to be the conversation here within the House and the Senate over the next few weeks, hoping to make some form of decision on what we're going to do moving forward, particularly after that was the situation, the conversation that kept us at bay for the longest government shutdown in history. Okay, I do want to bring back in our speaker here this morning, our guest, Bob McNab here from Old Dominion University. And you hear the House Speaker there speaking about the tax credits. One thing that I know that stuck out to me, he was talking about the savings that his party is saying people were able to have, and kind of made it seem like it was very minimal for those who were receiving tax credits. The KFF, which is a group that does track a lot of data when it comes to health care, they do polling just for anything that has to do with health care across our country. They would say if these extensions, along with what you were saying, if they were to expire, it would be so much higher for those who are reliant upon them now. When you kind of hear him saying that the savings were minimum, what they're saying is, like what you were saying, people would see maybe 114% increase in the next year if these tax credits were to expire. So just wanted to note that for sure. Anything else that gleaned out for you?
Well, first of all, you can use data in different ways, right? The speaker can be correct, and the Kaiser Family Foundation that you just referenced could be correct. If I look at the amount of subsidies and I look at the total programmatic cost of insurance in the United States or Obamacare, those subsidies would be a relatively small percentage. However, if I look at the average premium of people on the marketplace, who are a relatively small percentage of the overall health insurance marketplace in the United States, then those subsidies reduce costs significantly. So both are correct, it's just a different perspective. What I'm seeing in terms of the conversation, especially now that we have a draft bill from the Senate that you referenced is going to be voted on tomorrow, and what I suspect will be coming out of the House, is the Senate proposal and likely the House proposal will not be extending the Obamacare subsidies, but a replacement of those subsidies with high deductible plans and health savings accounts. And the problem is that what evidence we have in terms of what used to be called risk pooling, right? We want everybody in the health insurance pool because you have healthy people, you have sicker people, and that on average lowers premiums for the sick people, and maybe the healthiest people pay a little bit more, but you never know. If you're in your 20s, you get in an accident, and all of a sudden you need health insurance, right? So that risk pooling approach is the way to lower that cost of health insurance for everybody. If you move to a model where you allow insurers to peel off the healthiest people, then they can insure those people for relatively low cost, and then you have people who have pre-existing conditions and other health conditions that are a higher cost, and they get stuck in high premium pools. We used to do that before the Affordable Care Act. The problem is we have short memories. People don't seem to remember the time where if you have pre-existing conditions, and I'm not talking cancer, I'm talking asthma, I'm talking, you had acne as a kid, right? You broke a leg, you had a car accident. That became a pre-existing condition and moved you out of that low risk pool to a medium or higher risk pool and changed your deductibles considerably. We have forgotten what that was like. Also, people have forgotten that pre-ACA, we had caps on insurance, that your policy might have been a great policy, but it only covered $1 million in lifetime medical expenses. You get a heart attack or cancer or something traumatic in your life, and all of a sudden you found middle of your hospital stay, you were uninsured, and you couldn't pick up insurance anymore. So the devil is in the details, right? High deductible plan coupled with a high health savings account sounds like it can save you money, but the question is, first, how much is the government subsidy flowing into those health savings accounts? Right now, the Senate bill is proposing $1,000 or $2,000 a year. That will nowhere make up for the increase in the marketplace premiums or the deductibles. Let's say they freeze premiums on the marketplace, and I give you $1,000, and all of a sudden your deductible is $7,000 or $10,000. The net doesn't work out. So that really is what's bedeviled a lot of the plans from the Republicans in the past, is that the financial realities of these high deductible accounts or health saving accounts just run up against the rising cost of health care in the United States.
Such great perspective in bringing that in together. And the question for me, and I think for a lot of people now, is going to be, what are they going to decide upon in the next few days and what's going to actually happen with that? But great perspective in this. Okay, we got some other things I want to talk to you about because a lot is just going on right now. We haven't even talked about today. We're expecting to hear from Fed Chair Jerome Powell. He's having a meeting earlier. Well, I think, when's it supposed to start here? Is it happening now, Sarah, as we speak?
2:30.
It's 2:30. Well, we're going to hear from him at 2:30, but I think the
2:30
actual
is
meeting,
the announcement.
Yeah, I think the meeting may be going on right now, and he'll speak later on at 2:30. We're expecting to get another cut here for the third month in a row. But there was a word that I keep hearing floated around, and I wanted to ask you about it. And when I see different reports talking about this particular committee meeting, saying that we should expect a, quote, hawkish cut. What does that mean?
So hawkish is used often in the context of, for example, defense spending. That if you're a defense hawk, you want a stronger military, you're more conservative with regards to alliances and how people behave to you. A hawkish monetary policy, in this case, is you're worried about inflation. So remember, the Fed balances two things: price stability and employment. What's been happening with employment? Well, the labor markets have been slowing down nationally. We saw, for example, in the latest ADP private payroll data that 4 out of the last 6 months have had job losses. In Virginia, employers have added jobs for the year, but it's been sporadic. Some months it's contraction, some months it's growth. In Hampton Roads, the same thing. So we know labor markets are weakening. The unemployment rate is up. The people participating in the labor force are down. People reporting they're employed are down. That's one part of the picture. So in that case, the Federal Reserve will typically go, whoa, the economy's getting worse. Divorce themselves from equities markets. Stock market is not the reality. They'll look what's happening and say, people are becoming unemployed, corporate profits are under pressure, small businesses are under pressure, we need to cut interest rates to stimulate economic growth. But they're running up against the problem that headline inflation and inflation without food and energy was 3% in September in our latest report. Again, delayed because of the government shutdown. And so they're going, we've seen inflation creep up in the second half of 2025 because of tariffs. We expect inflation to continue to rise from 3% in the coming months. We're going to have to choose. Do we choose to lower interest rates because the job market is weakening and risk higher inflation, or do we keep interest rates where they are and risk job markets weakening further? And so they have pivoted to job markets. So now your question was, what does hawkish mean? Hawkish means we pivoted the job markets, but inflation is still giving us a problem. Maybe we're just going to have a smaller cut, 25 basis points, 1/4 percentage point, and then take a look at how things are going. Because we're still worried over here that we can make the mistake we made back in 21 and get behind inflation, and then we really have to raise interest rates to clamp down on inflationary expectations.
Meanwhile, you have President Trump, who has been very vocal over the last several months that he wants cuts when it comes to interest rates. But also yesterday, he was giving a speech at a rally in Pennsylvania, and he talked about affordability. And he touted his economic plan, and he says that it is working, asking for more time, and saying that really it was a crisis that he inherited. And the word affordability, I believe, at one point saying, hey, things are getting better. Are the numbers supporting that, for one? And then my second question to that, because you were just talking about what the Fed chair and what we're expecting with the cuts. Is it a plan that we just need to give it more time? Or from your analysis, do there need to be some adjustments?
Well, presidents love to claim economic successes as their own, and economic failures typically are an orphan. And this is not because of President Trump or President Biden or President Obama. This is typically how presidents operate. Good news, that's all me. Bad news, that was somebody else. And what we've seen in the national discourse, especially post-COVID, is that the cost of living has become a significant concern. It's the number one concern for American consumers, time and time again. I was just looking at the data this morning, for example. If we look at the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Survey, so the University of Michigan, since the 1960s, has been surveying consumers about their perceptions of the economy. Consumers' perceptions of the current state of the economy are the lowest in the history of the survey. That tells you, regardless of what policies are being put into place, Americans are saying, I feel that life is becoming increasingly unaffordable. And I think it boils down to this. in the data, what we are seeing is an 80-20 split of the economy. If you're in the top 20% of households by income, roughly $130,000, your income and consumption have outpaced inflation since COVID. So you are earning more after we account for inflation, and you're spending more after we account for the impacts of inflation. So for you, you own stocks, which are up. You own a house, which is up. You're gotten wage gains faster than inflation. Life feels fairly good. If you're in the bottom 80% of households with incomes below $130,000, your income and your spending has just kept pace with inflation. So what happens is you go into the grocery store, if you're in that category, and you look at prices, and you don't see that prices increased 3% from last year. You see that prices have increased by almost 30% on average since 2019. And you feel much worse about the economy, and you act much worse about the economy. And President Biden struggled with that issue. President Trump is now appearing to struggle with that issue as well. And part of this is the cost of shelter. We're not building enough housing. We haven't built enough housing in the United States to keep up with population growth since the Great Recession of 2007, 2009. But it's also a simple fact. And in economics, we call this salience. How visible are things to you? And if I came to you and I asked, how visible are prices to you? You would probably say, well, I touch prices every day. I go to the Starbucks. I go to the grocery store. I go to grab a burger. I pay for gas. I pay my car payment. I see prices every day. How often do you see your wages? Twice every 2 weeks? Twice a month? Once a month? So you're continuously updating your impression of prices, and you're slowly updating your impression of wages. And that means when you have higher rates of inflation, your perceptions of the economy tend to worsen dramatically.
You and your team at Old Dominion University, you release an outlook and analysis once a year for sure, a big one. That's going to come up, I believe it's next week. Mm-hmm. That's going to take place. Is there any insight that you might be able to provide, a little bit of a teaser for what you all are seeing so far as the state of our economy?
Sure. In October, we released our State of the Region report, which was looking at Hampton Roads. Next week, we'll release our State of the Commonwealth report, which looks at Virginia. And a lot of the themes that I've talked about today, slower job growth, higher unemployment, higher prices, lower consumer sentiment, pervade the report. But also in there is the challenge that waits the new governor and the new General Assembly. And we have to think of it this way. Virginia has run surpluses for the last several fiscal years, which is good news, right? The state has not needed to cut anything. It has sufficient resources to fund infrastructure, education, and other things. But if we look and we do this analysis in the report, we ask a simple question. Which cities and counties are net contributors to the Virginia budget, and which cities and counties are net recipients or takers from the Virginia budget? And not surprisingly, the cities and counties that contribute the most, where people pay the most in taxes and get the least in return from the state government in terms of services, are in Northern Virginia, Richmond, and Hampton Roads. We're subsidizing the remainder of the Virginia, which is okay. I mean, that's a political process and decision. But which cities and counties are the ones most hurt by cuts to federal employment and federal contracts and uncertainty with regards to trade? The counties in Northern Virginia, Richmond, and Hampton Roads, which suggests that the revenues to the state government are going to come under pressure next year. So now is not the time to engage in a lot of new spending. It's probably a time to revisit the core functions of government, right? Invest in K through 12 education. I'm an employee of ODU, so investments in higher education are a good thing also. But what we've seen in Virginia is those returns to education outweigh the spending. Investment in infrastructure, right? There's lots that can be done here in Virginia that can promote economic growth through investment in infrastructure. Let me give you the simple example, punching I-87 through into North Carolina. So we have a transit south out of Hampton Roads. Now, if you want to go to Raleigh, which way do you go first? You got to go west to Emporia, right? And then you go south. Just think of all the potential markets we're missing out of because of the increased transportation costs, because we don't have an interstate that leads out of Hampton Roads into the Carolinas, and how much economic development that could occur, much like the I-95 corridor out of Georgia into South Carolina. Because 30 years ago, when you left Atlanta and you were driving northeast Georgia into South Carolina, it was rural agriculture, and then BMW came and put a plant in Green, and people are like, why are you putting a plant in South Carolina near the Georgia border? Nobody's going to go there. Nobody cares. And now you drive it. It's vibrant because you invested in infrastructure and you made the conditions right for economic development.
Remind people again when that report is going to be coming out. I know it's next week, but which day is that going to
be? Right now we're scheduled for Tuesday.
For Tuesday.
And it'll be available online.
Okay. Thank you so much. We got Bob McNab here, who spent time with us this morning breaking down a lot of different topics. And hey, just ahead of the holidays too, where people have gone through their spending. And I did want to say one quick note here with the National Retail Federation. Their prediction, Americans will spend roughly $890 on gifts, food, and decor. That is less than the record that was spent last year at $902 by consumers last year. I imagine some of the conversation that we've been having here today probably playing in a bit on people spending a little bit less on gifts this year for the holidays.
Yeah. If people feel worse about the economy, they become increasingly myopic. I'm nearsighted, and I'll use myself as an example. So when you become nearsighted about the economy, you shift your consumption. You go, well, I don't need that car anymore. I got to pay that off for a longer time. I don't need to go out and buy that big piece of furniture. Or I'm going to shift towards those things that keep me going now and defer those things into the future because I don't know if I'm going to have a job. I don't know if I'm going to get a raise. I don't know my neighbor's going to lose their job. So right now we're seeing conditions for many Americans that look like 2008 in terms of their perception of the economy and the unemployment they're facing. We're not there yet, but you look at that. You look at equity markets and you look at people talking about a bubble in stock markets, the AI bubble, and it has echoes of 2008, and that's a history we do not want to repeat.
No.
And so, but that tells you if people are feeling that, they act like that, and that slows down their spending.
Looking forward to the rest of the report. Again, Dr. Bob McNab with Old Dominion University economics professor there. I love every time that you come on, all the insight that you're providing. Variety of topics. At any given time, something can pop up, and here we are. So